part of my kind of attempt to understand better what gets discussed a lot in business school, which is this issue about corporate social responsibility. So this is an attempt to provide a kind of I won't say an encompassing framework, but a perspective on it. And the way I'm going to do this is from a positive perspective, not a normative perspective. So I want to understand what kind of conduct we might expect when some firms are behaving in a responsible manner, and others, or perhaps that same firm, is under the influence of social pressure. So that's basically what I want to try to explain. And in sort of doing that, we'll also get kind of a little bit of an industrial organization of private politics as we go along. So we'll see that in just a second. So this is what I'm going to do in this session is, first of all, show you some just a preface this by saying Keith and I were at a conference 2-3 weeks ago, I guess it was. And so it starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, and I'm sitting in my hotel room actually reading William Minosi's thesis. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from David Austin Smith, who's the organizer of the conference. He says, listen, one of the speakers can't make it because of weather and delays at O'Hare. Can you substitute? And I said, substitute? I mean, I don't have my computer, I don't have an electronic file, I don't have anything. I do have a copy of the paper because I was going to read it on the airplane home. So anyway, so I quickly tossed together a few PowerPoints, which I'll show you now, on Mary's computer. And then after that, I actually wrote on the blackboard. And I'm going to do that here again. So this is writing on the blackboard for most of this. Okay, so so this is John. So the question is why is this slow? Okay? All right? Okay, so the first thing I do is what I'm talking about. I'm not going to use the term corporate social responsibility. I'm going to refer to moral management. So what I mean by that is a firm that voluntarily takes some social action, and it does so because of a moral duty. So the moral duty is going to arise, in this case, from a military framework. I'll see about that in a second. So what are examples of this? So one could be just there's some externality associated with the firm's operation, and it is not really regulated by government. And the firm may respond to it because it feels it has a duty to do so. So you think about emissions of greenhouse gases, which are regulated in the United States. Or you can think about the redistribution of profits, that is, paying a living wage when you don't need to because of labor market conditions. So I want to distinguish that, or I want to look at the case where citizens may distinguish between that and what I'll call corporate social performance. So what I mean there is, again, social actions of the same type, but here they could have a variety of motivations. One, it could be morally motivated, but it could also be just self-interest. That is, I produce a green product and I do it because I can make profits doing it. That's my motivation for doing so. Or I could take one of these actions up at the top here because of social pressure. I'm under pressure from groups within society, and because of their pressure, they can do harm to me. I want to do something to ameliorate their potential harm. And so I take the actions, I redistribute profits, or I respond to the externality. Of course, there are also going to be government mandates, and most of what I see in the literature talks about, it doesn't make any distinction among these four motivations. And I want to make a distinction. So I'm going to make a distinction between the first three. I'm going to leave government out, and you'll see why in a minute. So some of you know David Vogel's book, and basically he makes no distinction about why somebody takes an action of a responsible type. He's only concerned about the action itself. Okay? Yeah.
Are we supposed to think of moral management as a subset of corporate social performance? Or
Yes. Yes. So it's this subset here. Okay. Right. Exactly.
And are we also supposed to make a distinction between the property actions and the body motive? What's that?
No, that's not the distinction. So these motives can give rise to the actions that are listed here with the what's up.
I guess what I want to know is, are motives implicit in moral management?
in my definition, yeah, so I'm going to say something about that in a second. So yes, so in the sense that I'm doing it because I have a moral duty to do it. I'm not doing it for some other reason. All right. So,
So you want to consider the more or less pure cases, not
as what?
You want to consider the more or less motivation in pure cases, the ideal types, not the cases where some are doing it for a mixture of those. So they want.
Well, we'll allow a mixture, but we'll make a distinction by having different actors, different firms. So what is, why make this distinction matter? Why is it in the interest?
I was just going to follow up. What is the difference between social pressure and self-interest? Presumably the pressure to take it.
Self-interest is just profits. So I as a
So
firm
really,
can
in
make
the
profits.
absence of pressure presumably they're responding to it because of self-interest, not because of the moral.
Yes, right. But they wouldn't be doing anything in the absence of the social pressure. So we need to have social pressure in theory, and the social pressure has to be endogenous. So it can't be just something that's out there, okay, which is usually the way it's treated, but it's going to be endogenous. So why make this distinction matter? So from a normative perspective, the usual story that's told is, well, if you're morally managed, and if there's a new moral issue that arises, you're going to respond to it, and you'll do it because you have a moral duty to do so. A self-interested firm, on the other hand, won't respond to a new moral issue, a problem, unless there's social pressure or there's a profit incentive to do so. Okay? So that's kind of the normative perspective. But the perspective I want to take is really a positive one, which is if citizens don't differentiate or distinguish between moral management and corporate social performance motivated by self-interest or by social pressure, then social pressure is more likely to be directed at the morally managed firm than a self-interest firm. Okay? And it's the demands on it are going to be higher. So we want to show that in the model. And also the self-interested firm, we might think of as emulating the moral management firm. It doesn't have an incentive to act like the morally managed firm. The answer to this model is going to be no, unless what it's able to do is divert social pressure to some other firm.
So, in a setup where the institutional structure governing the firm is endogenous and responding to some internal pressures in the firm in the past, I can readily imagine a situation where a firm will behave in a morally managed, appear to behave in a morally managed way that's incentive compatible within the institutional structure in the absence of social pressure and in the absence of increased profit opportunities. I think there was either an osmotic Robinson sort of model or whether it's get at all survival model where the institutional arrangements induce that behavior and so the types don't separate.
Right. Okay. So this would be a model which what you do is you kind of respond to these things because what you anticipate is that the regime will somehow change if you don't. Okay. And so that's not in this. This is going to be a kind of a one-shot game. Okay. So you'll see that isn't in here. On the other hand, that's one of the sort of on the future agenda. So there's two parts of the future agenda. There's to look inside the firm and then to think about dynamics. So this is a step along the way. All right. So this is a little bit more what I have in mind with respect to this moral management is that there are two parts to it. One is what's required by utilitarianism, and the second is the duty to actually take the action. So I'm going to assume that the duty here is assigned to the firm, okay, to what I'll call a morally managed firm. And social pressure itself, we're going to think about social pressure. So this could come from at least two sources. One is public politics, that is, it comes through government, and we understand that. And what I'm going to focus on is private politics. I'll tell you why I'll focus on it in just a second. So this is outside of government, the absence of government. So it comes from citizens' preferences. And so citizens want firms to respond, for example, to this externalities, global warming, for example. The problem is that citizens' actions are plagued by coordination problems and free rider problems. So in this model, the agent of the citizens is going to be an activist organization. So this is going to be an NGO, and what they're going to do is they are going to apply social pressure to firms, to get firms to change their practices. And of course, this organization can't be exogenous. That is, the funds that it has available to apply social pressure has to be provided by the citizens themselves. So this will be effectively a market clearing condition. And activists here, what they're going to do is they're going to select a target, and they could target either the morally managed firm or a self-interested firm. They're going to make demands on their target, and they're going to threaten harm. Okay? And the harm that they're going to be able to threaten is going to be an increasing function of how much money citizens give. So the more citizens give, the more social pressure there is, and the more change will come. So we need to be explicit about that. So I'm going to assume that moral management is costly. Because if it were costly, there wouldn't be anything to explain, right? Because every firm would just do it, so that we would finish our lunch and go. So I'm going to assume that it's costly in the sense that it goes what I call beyond normal business activity. That is, it doesn't maximize profit and it doesn't maximize market value. Beyond that. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that moral management doesn't have some benefits. And it may also be the case that corporate social performance has benefits as well. So one would be, these are the ones that are in the law. Okay? So more consumers may be attracted to the firm if it conducts its activities in a more if it doesn't. So the consumers who are attracted may in fact be willing to pay more. It's possible also that the conduct that I engage in as a firm may reflect social pressure to other firms in a way for me. Or if pressure is brought against then it may in fact protect me. Why? Because citizens won't participate in delivering the harm only. And they might not do that or as much. You might not do that because I have a better moral reputation for being responsible. And it may also be the case that some citizens just like to hold shares in companies that do good, okay, that are morally managed. So you can think about a manifestation of that as these so-called socially responsible mutual funds, or one example of that, whether they are actually fit this category or not is something you can judge. I won't comment on. Okay, so to try to explore this, then what do we need in a model? So one thing that we need in a model is we need firms to interact. So we're going to have competition between firms in a marketplace with a product marketplace here. And we're going to try to trace the effects of corporate social performance, perhaps distinguish between moral management and not. That's one of the things we have to accomplish. The second thing we have to accomplish is we have to understand something about where social pressure is going to be applied in this economy. So this is going to then be a contest now ultimately between an activist and its target. So we want to also explain which firm is the target. We also have to price or value moral management or corporate social responsibility. So we're going to have a capital market in this model. And the capital market that we'll see is formulated, or citizens' preferences are formulated in a way we can actually get a price of moral management. Similarly, we have to price or value social pressure. And the reason we have to do that, and the reason that we can do it, is that citizens are going to make voluntary contributions to this activist organization, and they're going to trade off those contributions against doing social good or holding shares of these firms. So the model is intended to incorporate those things. So let me say a little bit about what's in it. So the first thing, there are citizens, and these citizens differ. So there's going to be a continuum of citizens who differ in their social preferences. There are going to be two firms only, a morally managed firm and a self-interested firm. There's going to be one activist organization. And what you won't find in the model I mentioned earlier is there's no government. Now, why isn't there government in this model? Well, one reason is it comes from economic theory. So let's think about a world in which government can do social good, but citizens can also do through their own personal giving. Right? So the way to think about that is a public goods model where it could be either provided by government and funded by taxation, or provided individually by citizens through their own personal giving. So if that's the situation, and the motive that citizens may have, the preferences citizens may have, is for the social good itself. So altruistic preferences. Well, in that model, if you have lump sum taxation, then government provision of the public good crowds out perfectly the personal provision of that public good. Right? So this is a result of We all mean there are lots of ways to explain that, but this is, I think, the simplest one. And the reason for that is there's an equilibrium where people are making choices, and when the government increases its spending a little bit, it's increasing its taxation a little bit, takes money away from citizens. When money goes away from citizens, they don't give as much to the social causes. So in some sense, if we had altruistic preferences in government in here, there wouldn't be anything to explain. It's basically a non-issue. Now, that becomes an issue when you have distortionary taxation, but I'm not going to consider that. So I'm going to leave out government, and I'm going to leave out altruistic preferences. Now, nevertheless, we're going to show that moral management can in fact crowd out personal giving to social causes, either perfectly or imperfectly. We'll understand the conditions for that.
Could you say a word or two about the activist? Is the activist assumed to be sincere in pursuing moral management, or is it to be?
I will say, maybe the next slide, let me check. No, okay, so let me answer it, and we'll see it more. So the activist here, so the activist here is happy to go beyond what's required by moral management. So I'll give several arguments. So one argument would be, when you reach the utilitarian optimum, citizens are still bearing part of the cost, right? That's socially efficient for them to bear part of the cost. And the activist may want to relieve some of that. That is, they may want to redistribute from citizens to the firm. Or there may be some kind of compensation for past harm.
The activist can't be an agent of.
He's not a perfect agent. He's not a perfect agent of the citizens.
But he's not, could not be an agent of the other firm.
No. Okay, good idea. No. I like that. No, not in this level. I wasn't clever enough to do that. Okay, so what are the citizen preferences that drive the action in the model? Well, certainly within the capital market, these are what are referred to as egoistic or privately characteristics of social good. So it's the fact that I give something personally, or that I hold shares in a morally managed firm, or I contribute to activists because I know the activists are going to apply social pressure and cause social good to take place. So it's the personal giving of this that is the motivation, at least in the capital market. So I have three references to this. So one is a social psychologist named Moda, who's actually a professor in the psychology department here. And so at this conference, he gave a talk about sort of this kind of thing. He referred to things like a desire to feel and look moral. That's the reason I give. Or I have a moral identity, like giving to social causes is consistent with that. Or I fear moral reproach if I don't give, that is from friends and colleagues and family members. And I'm concerned about how others would judge me or see me. And this kind of view is also found in the economics literature, not very often as you might imagine. But Gary Becker has a paper long ago where he trying to explain charitable behavior. And he said it could be behavior explained by the desire to avoid the scorn of others or to receive social acclaim. And that would also be consistent with the preferences we'll have. And Rioni calls this as just warm glow. I get a warm glow. I feel good because I'm giving money personally to a social cause, for example, or shares in some company that is supposed to be morally managed.
Is it good to matter that there's a difference in terms of observation of others by others?
That doesn't matter. I just have this warm glow. I feel good about this. Whether it could be explained by a whole variety of things. And you must know the psychology literature a lot better than I do, I'm sure. Okay. And this, by the way, this warm glow isn't just out there. It has to come from action. So it's because I do something that I receive this warm glow. Okay. All right. So where do I get this from? Well, one is I could give personally to social causes. I could contribute to the activist. I could hold shares in a morally managed firm, and I could also hold shares in self-interested firms. And all of these may be subject to moral preferences. Or I may have no moral preferences. Okay. And these moral preferences could be correlated with preferences in the marketplace. And I'll show you that in just a second. What do firms do? So firms do two things here. One, mainly what they do is personally. They can respond to this unaddressed externality that I mentioned. And they can also redistribute profits to social causes, corporate. And When they do this, of course, what we're going to find is that they attract a clientele of consumers who do or do not value this corporate social performance. And they also attract a clientele of investors who either do or do not have a warm flow from holding shares in these firms. And this is going to be a model of complete and perfect information. I should have put there the one-shot model as well. Okay. All right, so what's the timing here? So the timing is that, the first thing is that firms are going to decide whether or not to respond to this externality and to redistribute profit. And a morally managed firm just does this automatically because there's a moral duty to do so. The self-interested firm does this only if it's going to maximize its profits or its market value. So one of the things we want to answer is the self-interested firm going to behave like the moral managed firm in this model because of the threat of social pressure? Next, what citizens are going to do is they have an endowment, and they're going to allocate that in the usual kind of capital market way to savings, personal giving, contributions to the activists and shares in these firms. And the activist is going to then choose a target and launch a campaign. And the target itself is going to have three kinds of options. You could either concede to the demand that the activist makes, you could fight, or you could bargain. Okay, those are the three alternatives. We have to characterize that. Firms then are going to set prices for their products, and then citizens are going to obtain their financial returns, and they're going to allocate those returns to themselves. Okay? So this last stage basically never happens. It's also incorporated in here. Okay, so I'm going to try the following. Since we get kicked out of this room at various times, in half an hour or 40 minutes, I'm going to talk about results first and not at the end. So you probably won't have a chance to do that. Okay, so these are examples of results. So the first one is, and this is just looking at the product marketplace. Most consumers, all of them, want to reward firms for doing good, that is for corporate social performance. Self-interested firms in this model will not provide corporate social performance, even if its cost is zero. We'll try to understand why. A morally managed firm in this case attracts a clientele, and we wouldn't be surprised to see that it's one that consumers who value this kind of activity, but they also are going to pay a high price for it. And the self-interested firm is, on the other hand, going to charge a low price and serve consumers who have low valuations. Social pressure itself is going to be increasing in the stake of the firm. And in this case, the morally managed firm may have a greater stake in this market, and therefore it could in fact be an attractive target. Okay? So one way to think about this, the simplest way is if marginal costs increase in this model, social pressure is actually going to go down. So if marginal costs drop, social pressure goes up. More of a shift in demand, a favorable shift in demand, social pressure in fact goes up.
Just a clarification, the firms are supplying different goods, right?
Well, that's what we're going to see. So firms are going to supply identical products, but they're differentiated with respect to this dimension. Right. So there is a product differentiation model. Okay. So it's just a standard model. I mean, you go to Tirol, page X, and there it is. And social pressure here is going to be a normal good in the sense that the more effective it is, the more you like it, that is, the more it produces change, the greater are going to be the contributions. Okay? We'll make that formal. And then we're going to talk about whether citizens distinguish between moral management and corporate social performance motivated by self-interest or social pressure. And if the citizens do in fact distinguish, then the morally managed firm is going to avoid social pressure if it has a reputational advantage. And we'll try to clarify what we mean by a reputational advantage. But if citizens don't distinguish, that is, between the two, then the morally managed firm is more likely to be the target of social pressure. And what that means is that social pressure increases the cost of moral management. It makes it more costly for firms to do this. They also, if citizens don't distinguish, the firms, both firms have lower profits. When the self-interested firm is targeted, they actually have higher profits when the morally managed firm is targeted. Again, they act separately. They are in terms of the industrial organization of private politics, In this model, higher quality and better funded activists will target self-interested firms. And the lower quality and poorly funded activists will target poorly managed firms. You'll see that. That is say what we mean by the quality of an activist.
Why is that?
Why is that? I need to show you a little bit to explain why that is. Okay, so that's what's coming on the board chart. Okay, but it's basically a characterization. First of all, you have to characterize who the activist will target. Okay, and what we're going to show is that the higher the quality, the more willing you are as the activist to target the self-interested firm. The reason you're willing to do that is because you can get more bang out of them, given that you're higher quality. Okay? So it's not a linear model. Okay? Now, this I've already basically said. In this model, moral management, social good, or the moral glow, or the corporate social performance, the moral glow from that, is not a traded good. But still in this model, it can be priced in the capital markets. Okay? And so we'll find that the market value of the morally managed firm is actually greater than its financial return. And the reason is because some citizens receive a moral flow from holding shares in firms that conduct themselves in a moral manner.
So if that's true, then why doesn't the self-interested firm is simply trying to be a morally managed firm?
Well, that's one of the questions we're going to ask. Remember, the assumption I made was that moral management is costly. Okay, it doesn't maximize market value. It goes beyond market maximization.
But they do a better job of obtaining market value than the person who's trying to maximize market value.
That's not quite the right way to say it in the context of this theory. This isn't a statement. Okay, this isn't first of all, the market value comes from several things. Okay, so one is what are the profits that you're making in the product marketplace, right? And those products, that marketplace can yield higher profits for the self-interested firm or higher profits for the morally managed firm, depending on basically the parameters of the model. So in fact, I don't want to say anything about that. So which one has the absolute higher market value isn't something that this theory is going to bother to explain. Now, we'll try to explain whether or not, given whatever profits they make in the marketplace, okay, whether or not there's an incentive from the preferences of citizens for holding shares in good firms, whether that motivation is great enough to cause them to actually emulate the morally managed firm. We'll see the answer to that, okay? Both from the product marketplace and also from the capital
from the get-go, if you're a morally managed firm or a self-interested firm.
Well, remember, the first stage of the model is you act, right? So the first stage of the model, the morally managed firm responds to that externality in a socially optimal way. Okay, that's observed.
Right.
Okay, and you can observe that the other firm doesn't. So then the question is, why doesn't the other firm do that? And the reason is because its market value would go down if it did so.
But then, okay, maybe I'm just being thick here, but then at the end, the morally managed firm actually has higher valuation. So couldn't it, let's say it moved first, why wouldn't it try and pretend to be a morally managed firm?
This is a complete information model, that's why.
Okay, so everyone knows who a morally managed firm is.
Well, right, but we're going to allow a self-interested firm to take exactly the same action, okay, as the morally managed firm, okay? All right? We'll find that it doesn't want to do.
Yeah, but the thing is, the citizens know when they're like making investments, so on, it's not going to take the socially appropriate action of the morally managed firm.
Well, when they make their decisions, when they make their investment decisions, they already know whether it did or did not act that way. Because the firms move first, then citizens buy shares.
Okay.
So citizens already know it. And we'll allow the self-interested firm to respond to the externality in exactly the same way as the morally managed firm does. And maybe the citizens will give them exactly the same credit for doing so, right? Okay? Okay? But that doesn't mean necessarily they want to do it. We'll show exactly why.
Okay.
There's several reasons for it. So that's where we're headed. Okay, this is the last slide. Okay, so go like this. Okay, so there's a clientele effect amongst investors as well, and that goes exactly as you might imagine. For those people who view the holding of shares in a morally managed firm as a close substitute for personal giving, those people are going to invest and hold shares in the morally managed firm. They're not going to do personal giving, however. And those who view it as a poor substitute are, in fact, going to engage in personal giving and won't hold shares in the morally managed firm. So we'll be able to say something about the clientele effect here. And so one issue is, well, going back to citizens and their preferences. So citizens here who like corporate social performance, get a warm glow from it, are going to reward the morally managed firm in two ways. One, they're going to pay a premium for the price for its product in the marketplace, and they're going to pay a premium for its shares above the financial return. Okay. This market value of the morally managed firm is also going to be increasing in the citizens' preferences for this. So we're going to do a little first-degree stochastic dominance comparative statics analysis to show that. Also, at the same time that citizens are buying shares of these firms, they're also making contributions to the activists. And we'll show that in equilibrium, then higher quality activists are going to attract greater contributions, okay, and then multiplying greater social pressure. Okay, and so this is then, to John's point, is self-interested firms don't have an incentive to act like the successful provider, to act like a morally managed firm, unless they could shift the social pressure away from them and do something else. Okay. So that's okay. So that's all right. So let's talk about how to do this. So the first thing is that we're just going to work backwards. So the last stage is basically citizens are going to be buying products from these two firms. So we're going to have two firms. So one is morally managed and the other is self-interested. So this means you only do something if it increases your profits, or if you are trying to reduce social harm, social pressure. And citizens here, or what we'll call them consumers, and that citizens in their role as consumers have preferences. So they have a utility function. It's a function of something like psi. And this is going to be a model where each one of these buys one unit. And you buy one unit from one of the two firms. Okay, so this is the standard vertical differentiation model in industrial organization. If you've studied it. So you get this, and then you may have some preference for, and I'm just going to call this B for sort of the good that the firm that you're buying from does. Okay? And then, of course, you're going to pay some price P. Okay? So that's the price you're going to pay for this product. So consumers have this utility function. They buy one unit. Okay? So it's 1 times P, 1 times the rest of this. And this B is going to be a function of, one is the ex-ante response that the firm may make to the externality. So I'm going to call that X task. And it may also be a function of the ex post response that is ex post to social pressure. And we're going to call that, that's going to be something called Z. I'll talk about what that is when we get here. So this is a function of things, okay, that some of which are going to be endogenous in the model. So this is endogenous, and part of this is endogenous as well. Okay? All right, so the notion here is if you're buying from a firm that does good, or you think is doing good, you like to go to Starbucks because they have this kind of aura to them, or you buy with the Timberline boots, is that the one? Because they're supposedly too good, or if you go to Walmart because it's a little smaller. This is kind of the standard model. And psi is just some number between 0 and anything. Okay? So there's some distribution of psi. Okay? So there's some distribution of psi. It's just a marginal distribution of psi. This could be correlated with the warm glow preferences in the capital market, and we'll allow that. But this is the end of the game, so it's just a marginal distribution. Okay? All right. So now the consumer can buy from either one of these firms. So it's an identical product. The only thing that's different is this differs between the two firms. Okay? All right? Okay. So some of you may know the Feddersen and Gilligan model. And they refer to these as credence goods. That is, you care about, for example, the conditions under which they were made or the externalities associated with their manufacturing. And because you care about that, the products, even though they're identical products, okay, you don't have the same preferences for. Okay, so now what's going to be the equilibrium? What are consumers going to choose? Well, they're just going to choose between the two offerings based on whichever utility is the higher. And I'm going to assume that the kind of good that you get from the morally managed firm is greater than what you get from the self-interested firm. So that's the only thing I'll require at this moment. I'll actually let this be equality in the second illustration. So the notion is that sort of the morally managed firm, by definition, is sort of doing something more, or at least as much, as the self-interested firm. So what this means is that there's going to be some consumer, let's call it consumer side asterisk, side star, and that's going to be given by the following. It's going to be the difference between the price charged by the morally managed firm and the price charged by the self-interested firm divided by the difference between the benefits or the perceived benefits that come from buying from these two firms. Okay? So this is the standard model. So when you think about this is 0, this is psi. There's some distribution here. For example purposes, I'll just let it be uniform. Well, I'm actually going to put a mass point here, since I believe that there are lots of people who don't care about this. Therefore, we're going to psi 0. And so there's going to be some point here, and all of these people are going to buy from the morally managed firm, and all of these people are going to buy from the self-interested firm. Okay. So now, what can we say about this model? Yeah.
The BM is always bigger than the BS. That's an assumption.
So I'm going to do that as an assumption. But I want to tell you. So I'm going to just do one more thing, and I'm going to do the case where they're equal.
I mean, the question was going to be why would the consumers? You can see why the consumers would care about the conditions under which the good was produced and so on and so forth. But not the motive that induced the firm, which is what this B and real BS gets at. Right? They also care about the motive that led the firm.
Yes.
They care about the identity of the firm, not
Yes.
just the conditions under which.
Right. Well, this is in the model. What they're going to care about is the following. So this ex ante is going to be two things. One is for firm M, there's just going to be something that's morally required. That's just what you do. And for firm S, you may do something, okay, that is of the same nature. Now you may not go as far, okay, and this thing may or may not produce the same benefit here. Okay? So I'm going to actually introduce a parameter. I'm going to call it kappa. And so kappa is essentially how much credit a firm is given because it is doing something that consumers like, but it's doing it only because it's been the recipient of social pressure. So that's this issue about whether consumers or citizens distinguish between social pressure induced or morally managed induced.
So the citizens are heterogeneous perhaps with regard to how much they value one person, but they're homogeneous with regard to what induces them one below that.
Yeah, so this kappa I'm going to let be the same for all consumers.
There aren't many people who feel good that Walmart is employing people who are otherwise unemployed.
Well, so the question is, where does this come from? So, for example, I happen to believe that Walmart does a great thing because it sells to poor people and at prices they can afford and improves their lot. Okay, a lot of people don't seem to think that way, but that's true. Now, other things might be true as well. Why can they do that? Okay. All right. So in this, let me give you that. So one result that comes out of this is that the equilibrium price charged by the morally managed firm is always greater than the price of the self-interested firm. So that's a standard result. Now, what's the interpretation of this? So let's do one more thing, and we'll come back to interpreting. this thing here is fixed by the requirements of the duty of moral management. Okay, so this is fixed. So now let's ask the question: what is it that the self-interested firm would like to do in this marketplace? So one thing it could do is act like the morally managed firm, right? So if it does that, then BS increases. Okay? So when BS increases, what happens? Well, the first thing is that so if BS increases, what that implies is that the profit of the self-interested firm actually goes down, and the profit of the morally managed firm goes down. Okay? So what's in the interest of the self-interested firm here is always to have this be as small as possible. Okay? So this is a standard kind of property of these vertical differentiation models, that what the firms want to do is differentiate their products as much as possible. Okay? And given that this one is morally managed and is committed to doing this X star, this one is going to choose to equal to 0. Okay? Now, they may, because of social pressure, they may, in fact, sacrifice and increase this, but you can see why this discourages them. Okay? All right. Now, by the way, I don't have any statement about which of these products is bigger. It doesn't matter. What matters for the theory is that when the self-interested firm tries to emulate in the product market the morally managed firm, profits go down. Its profits go down. Okay? So there's an incentive for as much product differentiation as possible in this. Now, what's the nature of competition? Well, let's look at this thing. Suppose that BS were to go toward BM. Okay, just think about this. So what does that mean? Well, in the limit, what's happening when BS goes toward BM, the limit of this is Bertrand competition. Okay, you're selling two products that are identical both with respect to the B's and with respect to the utility you get from the product itself. Okay, what that means is price gets driven down to the level of marginal cost. Okay? And in this model, what product differentiation does is it lessens the intensity of price competition. So what you want to do here in the market of products is you want as little price competition as possible, and the way to get that is as much product differentiation as possible, and that's the reason for this. Okay, so
the statement about product differentiation is only true with no third entry, right? Potential third entry.
Right. Okay. So I discussed that a little bit in the paper. So the question is now, what about the third? So the interesting case is one morally managed firm and two self-interested firms. So what's going to happen is we have the same sorting. This with a morally managed firm having the higher price, but now one of these self-interested firms is going to product differentiate it. So they'll split the market into three parts. One that will serve here, one that will serve here, and the other one will serve here. Okay? But again, that's an equilibrium result, and they would still like less product differentiation, or more product differentiation. Okay. So this incentive for product differentiation is an important part of the motivation in this. Okay, so that's the product. That's what happens at the end. And then what happens before this is that we have an opportunity to, well, we're going to examine social pressure. So social pressure is going to work in the following way. So this is now the private politics. Okay, and so how does this work? First of all, we have an activist, and the activist is going to have, so this goes to Bruce's question. So what the activist is going to care about is the magnitude of this response to the externality. Okay? So it's willing to go beyond this. Now, of course, it's willing to go only as far as what it can get. So we have to characterize what it can get. Right? So this is just to make things simple. Okay? And then what the activist is going to do is there's going to be three things. So this is what A does. Okay, it selects a target. It makes a demand. And what's a demand? Well, a demand is this is a demand of what the firm that's targeted I is supposed to do with respect to mitigating the externality. Okay? So this is its demand. So this is the next post. This is the next post, right? So that's you. Okay? All right? We'll see where Z comes from in a second. Okay? And the third thing is that there's a threat of harm. And the threat of harm is some function psi of A, and A is the dollars that are actually actually contributed by citizens. Now, that happened in a previous stage, so we'll have to work back toward that. And so this is going to be an increasing function of it. So the more resources the activist has, the more social pressure that it can apply. Okay, so this is what the activist does. And what the target does, what the target can do is the following. So it could just concede to this demand. It could fight. There's some cost, fixed cost, Y, to fight. And what it's going to do is it's going to win with probability 1 minus Q. Okay, so with probability Q, the activist wins. So the quality of the activist is Q. That is, higher quality activists are more likely to win. Okay? The other thing it could do is it could run. Okay? So I could draw you the tree, but we don't have a lot of time. But the tree is basically the activist gets money here, A. It sets up a campaign and starts to execute it. That's what makes this credible. It makes a demand on its target. Okay? The firm then is the target is then going to decide whether to concede immediately. In this model, the more interesting case is where it doesn't concede initially, where in fact what's optimal is to fight. Okay? So I'm going to assume it goes this way. Okay? But if the firm loses, then it's going to concede. Okay? That is, the activist is going to make a demand such that if the firm wins the campaign, the firm will concede. Otherwise, it isn't satisfied with this preference function. Okay? So we're going to characterize here the maximal demand that can be made, and of course that depends simply on whether you win the fight and how much harm you can cause to your target. Now, if we step back a step earlier, all of this can be anticipated because it's a complete information model. So the firm and the activist know what's going to happen on the equilibrium path of play, so they have an incentive to bargain. Both of them have an incentive to bargain. So what they will do is, in fact, they're going to bargain. Okay? So what's the bargaining institution here? Who knows? So when you don't know, you just assume it's Nash. So I'm going to look at the Nash bargain, and that's what this is. That's what this is. So the Nash bargain is Z, and you can compute it here. And what's interesting is so Z here is the bargain that you get when you target for Y, and this is going to be the Nash bargain, which I'll do more right afterwards. Okay. So now what the activist wants to do is to look at Z star M and Z star S and decide which one it wants to target. And of course, which one it wants to target is whichever of these is larger. Okay? That's for given these preferences. Okay? So we need to compare these two. Okay? So I'm not going to write out what the expressions are. They are in the paper. But what I'll do is I'll draw you some pictures of comparative status. But let me introduce one more thing here, which is one of the early slides I listed what some of the benefits might be from moral management. And one of them was that moral management might give the target firm a good reputation. And when it has a good reputation, that may protect it from some of the harm that the activist is trying to deliver. Okay? So we're going to represent that by a term mu. So there's going to be a mu m and there's going to be a mu s. And this mu m is a function of ex-ante measures that were taken by the morally managed firm, and maybe ex-ante measures taken by the self-interested firm as well. Although we'll see equilibrium, we're not going to see that. Okay? So the harm that's actually applied by the activist is something like this. So we want to compare these. And so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at how strong does your reputation have to be before the morally managed firm can escape the targeting of the activist. So I want to ask, when UM is less than or equal to some cut point, call it UM hat, and this thing is going to depend on parameters, and I'll draw pictures of what that looks like. And we'll get some industrial organization of private property.
So this activist only cares about their single issue. It's not like the consumers higher, they'd be more likely to go after the S firm.
Right, so they might be. So what I'm thinking here is an activist that campaigns, okay, that actually threatens harm. Okay, so when we teach this stuff at the MBAs, we do a session on that, or we do 2 sessions on that. Okay, so this is not a faithful agent of the consumer. Okay, so I'm trying to put some kind of agency difference between what the activist does and what citizens can do. Basically, all they can do here is fund this kind of an activist.
But it might be interesting to distinguish between an enlightened and an unenlightened activist
Yeah.
and how they have different effects.
So that would be very interesting. Here, the way to do this, well, I mean, we know that there's only one activist. That's the problem. Okay? If there were an array, what ultimately you would like is an array of activists, and you'd like to be able to say something about which firms they essentially match with in terms of targeting or even cooperation. So that isn't here, but that's a good thing to study. And so I've thought a lot about that. And what I'm going to say is something about the industrial organization of activists with these preferences, with this strategy. Okay, that's all I can say for this model. Okay, so let me draw a picture here of what I compare to static. So there is this cut point, and let me just do 2 of these things. So this is one of the points I made on the 3rd slide. So I'm going to look here at this mu m. There's going to be some mu m hat here, and this is going to be this capital. So this is the question about how much credit do citizens give to a firm that takes an action to respond to the externality and does so only after it's been targeted by the actors. Right? So kappa might be 0, it might be positive, it's small, it could be as high as 1. And so what we're imagining is, so we want to characterize this thing as a function of kappa, and you can show that that's always a decreasing function. And if this is the value of the true value of this mu m up here, and this is the cut point, then we can see that here, if we look at it, so this is some K star here, if we look at this, then firms over here, that is the activists, if citizens distinguish well and give a small k to the firms that respond to social pressure, then we're in this region, and it's the S firm that's going to be targeted. Why? Because the reputation, O is good here, the reputation of the morally managed firm is sufficiently high to cause the activists to prefer to target the self-interested firm. On the other hand, if a lot of credit is given, and if citizens don't, for example, Bowman was suggesting, don't distinguish between why they did this, okay, then the morally managed firm is going to be targeted. So if citizens don't distinguish, then the morally managed firm is going to be the one that gets the targeting from these kinds of activities. Okay? So that's one of the points that I made earlier. I also talked about this issue about the quality of activists. You could also put here the funding that they have. And again, we want to put up here mu. This is going to be mu hat m equals mu m. And this mu hat m is an increasing function of these things. Something like that. So in this model, what it says is that here, so if this is the case, then here the morally managed firm is going to be targeted, and here the self-interested firm is going to be targeted. So this is that prediction that I gave you earlier. So this is a little bit in the spirit. It says activists who are better at delivering this harm, for example, why? Because they have more money, or second, they're more likely to win a contest because they're just better at it. They're going to be targeting the self-interested firm, and those who are less effective are going to target the morally managed firm. Okay? And the reason is that they have greater effectiveness, and therefore, essentially, if you like, crack harder enough.
And do citizens know the difference between the high quality and low quality activists?
Yeah. So all of this is common knowledge. There's no hope of a little bit of incomplete information like this. All right. So the point from here is that we can make a characterization of who gets targeted. Where is social pressure going to be applied? So if the activists are well-funded or they're very good, then we're going to find the self-interested firm is going to be the target. If the activists aren't very effective at delivering social pressure or that's winning a contest, then, or they have low funds, then in fact the lowly managed firm is going to be the target. I was tempted here to say that that means the M firm is a soft target, but I'm not sure what soft means here. But we have a good interpretation of that. Okay, so that's this. And then in the few minutes we have left, I want to talk about the capital market. Okay, so this is like a normal capital market in the sense that, so I won't write out all this in this. Citizens have endowments. What are their endowments? They have some initial wealth. We're going to assume that's the same for everybody. And second, in fact, it doesn't matter because I'm going to have quasi-linear preferences. And they also hold initial shares in these two firms. And then what they can do in the capital market is they can allocate those resources in various ways. Now, what are the ways they can allocate? So one is they can engage in personal giving to social causes. They could also allocate something to the activists. So these are amounts of money. They could also hold a share in the morally managed firm, or they could hold a share in the self-interested firm, and they could also save. Okay, we'll assume there's no discounting. The interest rate is 1 year. The discount rate is 1 year. The discount factor is 1. Okay, so this is what they do. They allocate those funds, and what are their preferences? Well, by the way, once they do that, this produces a financial return. We call that R. And they're going to take this financial return and they're going to spend it. They're going to buy a composite consumer good, and they're going to pay for one of these products up here. Okay? They're going to pay for some product PM, PM or PS. Okay? And of course, all of these investments are made in anticipation of what's going to happen down the line. Who's going to be targeted? Okay? Now, what are citizens' preferences? So their utility looks like the following. Their utility is going to be for consumption, plus the utility they get from up here. So that's going to be V. Okay? And they're also going to get utility from this warm glow, or social satisfaction, from what they do here, from their actions. So what is that? So this is going to be something we'll call capital S. And just as a simple example, M alpha would be 0 to 1, just make it strictly concave. So what is this social satisfaction? Well, it's the warm glow you get from giving money to victims of Hurricane Katrina, for example. It's also holding shares in the morally managed firm. So this is simplified notation. Assume that it's only the morally managed firm knows something about this externality. And so what's this going to be? Well, first of all, this firm is going to take some of its profits. These are profits from up here. And it's going to allocate some proportion of them, okay, some proportion of them to corporate giving. And it's also going to respond to the externality. That's this X star that I put up here. And we're going to assume that the marginal cost of responding to the externality is some constant tau. Okay, so this is, if you like, the social good that is being done by the firm, and this is the share I own. And so I get some warm glow from knowing that the shares I'm holding in this firm, in fact, are producing some good. Okay? All right. Now, I also am contributing to the activist, right? So when I contribute to the activist, that's only a small part of its capital A there. So there's going to be some total amount that is given. So this is my share, just like EAM is a share. My share of what the activist gets. We're going to assume rational expectations that we filled in equilibrium. So there's some A star here. And then what the activist does is it produces change Z, this Nash market here. Okay, so it's Z star, and that depends on which firm is targeted and why. We put them all in the same units. This is multiplied by tau. So this is then and so I'm going to put a parameter here, theta. And theta is in 0, 1. Okay? So let me explain what this is. So G is personal giving, right? So I actually write the check or give the dollars into the bucket, for example. So the theory here is I may get more warm glow from doing that than I do from these indirect means of just holding shares or writing a check to environmental defense, for example, to put pressure on firms. So this theta is just something between 0 and 1. It indicates how close to substitute these things are for personal gain. Okay? Right? Okay, so what the consumers, what the citizens do then is they maximize this utility, okay, taking into account the financial return and whatever warm glow preferences they get. Okay? And there's an equilibrium. Okay? So the equilibrium conditions are a set of first order conditions, and they are three market clearing conditions. One market clearing condition is, of course, that the A to M's added up over all citizens have to equal 1. A to S for self-registered firm has to equal 1 added up over all citizens. And adding up all the contributions by individual citizens have to equal what citizens expected to be given to the activist in the act. That's the rational expectations condition. Okay, so what does that equilibrium look like? So let me do two things. One is, let's say how we value momentum here. So what's the market value? So the market value here is going to be rho m star in equilibrium. Okay? So what is that going to be equal to? Well, one, it's going to be equal to the financial return. Okay, so what's the financial return? Well, it's the profits you earn minus what you give away, minus whatever cost of fulfilling your moral obligation you incurred. And then in addition to that, then some citizens are going to hold your shares. Why? Because they get a warm glow from it. And when they get a warm glow from it, what that means is in equilibrium, moral management is present. Okay? So there is a number, theta star. Theta star is in this interval as well. Okay? And this is going to be multiplied by this stuff right here. What is the firm does? Okay? All right, so this is the market value. And you can actually get a characterization of what theta star is. You can write out the market clearing conditions and identify what it is and what its properties are. You can compare the statics on it. I won't do those here. So let's just interpret this. So if the firm got no credit for the responding to this externality, that is for doing this X star, then that is from citizens, that is all the thetas were equal to 0, then this term goes away, and this is just the financial return. That is, it has to be that, right? Dollar in, dollar out. Okay? If there is a warm glow, then you get something more, and it depends on the magnitude of the theta star. Okay? All right, so you can see that the cost of moral management is H times pi star times 1 minus theta star, and the same with respect to tau x star. Okay? So the cost of moral management is 1 minus theta star times the star. Okay? So let's do an example. So suppose that all of the thetas equals 1. So every citizen gets as much warm glow out of holding shares and giving a morally managed firm and giving to the activists as with personal giving. So if everybody has theta equal to 1, then theta star has to be equal to 1. If theta star is equal to 1, then this term is 0. So moral management is costless. It doesn't cost the firm's owners anything. Okay? What's the interpretation of that? We use two. So one interpretation is just this is crowding out. Right? When the firm does good, citizens in the aggregate just reduce their giving, personal giving, by exactly the same amount. So it's again a crowding out. The original kind of insight on this was by Graf Zimmern and Small. They interpret this as a Modigliani-Miller result. They just think about it in the usual financial market. That is, anything that the firm does, for example, to increase its corporate giving, is exactly offset by what citizens do in terms of reducing the aggregate. Citizens do in terms of reducing their personal giving. Okay? And then if theta is just distributed somewhere between 0 and 1, theta star will be as well, then the firm actually gets some credit for its moral management. And the amount of credit it gets is determined by the magnitude of this star. So that's kind of one result. And you can actually give a characterization of this. It's actually quite simple. And by the way, you don't need quasi-linear preferences to get this. You can do this with non-separable preferences. You don't have to do like this. Okay? It'd be nice if they were well behaved, strictly concave, for example. So this is a much more general result. So what happens in terms of, the question is now, well, who are these citizens who, in fact, give this additional value to a morally managed firm? Well, so citizens here are arrayed on theta, and it's between 0 and 1, and there's some theta star. So everybody over here has theta m equal to 0. That is, they don't hold any shares in this firm at all, but they do give person okay? So they have G star greater than 0. The people over here all hold shares in the morally managed firm, and they don't give personally at all. And why is that? Well, because the morally managed firm is doing much of the work, the person is not giving those here, plus it has a financial return. In addition, these people also contribute to the activist. So why do they contribute to the activist? That's obvious, right? Because contributing to the activist is equivalent to the warm glow from it is a perfect substitute for the warm glow from shareholder. Okay? Now that also tells us that in equilibrium, the contribution to the activist can be priced as well. Okay? And what's the price of activism? Well, the price of activism is, because they're perfect substitutes, arbitrage implies that the price of activism is theta star as well. Okay? So the amount that's going to be contributed, A star, this thing, I have it here somewhere here, A star is going to be equal to theta star times tau times the anticipated bargain that the activist will get. Okay? So this is the final condition characterized. So this thing, for example, this thing is increasing in the quality of the activist. The more likely the activist is to win a contest, the greater will contributions be, and hence the greater will be the anticipated bargain, because these stars are going to be increasing the threat from the activist. And if that's the case, then the amount of contributions go on. Right? So the activist essentially gets supported based on how much performance it can produce. All right, what else do I want to say? You can do lots of comparative stats. So where's the woman who kicks us out of here? So I'm going to take 5 more minutes. So this is now gives us the full equilibrium of this, with one exception, which is what happens at the beginning of the game. So at the beginning of the game, remember, the morally managed firm has done this X star. And now we want to ask the question, is the self-interested firm going to do the same or do something like it? So what would be the answer to that? Well, so let's just sort of reason through. What are the effects of the self-interested firm responding to the externality in anticipation of being targeted by the activist? So let's suppose that looking down the tree, the self-interested firm says, I'm going to be targeted by the activist. And if that's the case, maybe if I do something today, it will cause the activist to shift to another firm. Now, of course, here, it's only one other firm, that's the morally managed firm. Okay? All right, so what are the economics look like? Well, first of all, I know as a self-interested firm that if I respond to the externality, my BS is going to go up. Right? When my BS goes up, I know my profits are going to go down. So there's a first of all, a big effect right from that. Okay? The second thing I know is, well, if I behave like the morally managed firm and citizens give me some credit for doing so, that is, this capital is positive, then I'm going to get some additional value from what I do. So that's kind of an offset. Remember that offset is always, in this model, less than 1, so it's not a full, it's a partial offset. And third, my reputation may be better. So my mu s up here, which is a function of x hat s, which is what I do at the beginning of the game, is actually going to be less, which means that I'm a less attractive target to the activist. Okay? Now, when you put all those three together, it turns out that that's not enough to motivate emulating the morally managed firm. What is enough to emulate the morally managed firm? Well, what may be enough is if you could shift the activist away from you, right, there's away from you to the morally managed firm. Right? Now, if that were the case, then you would avoid the pressure, and if you were able to avoid the pressure, the cost of it, of course, is the tau times however much you have to act ex ante to deflect the pressure. Okay? Now, the question is, of course, what would happen in that? So that's not modeled in the paper because it's kind of obvious what happens. So if that were the case, you could use a self-interested firm could deflect the activist to the morally managed firm. The morally managed firm knows that. So the morally managed firm now has an incentive to do a bit more itself, okay, to offset what the self-interested firm does. So they're in a race to the top, basically. Okay? And of course, when they're in a race to the top, the incentive is to act collectively. Okay? So acting collectively against social pressure is basically the response that you can see here. And that's kind of what you see in many industries is the industry tries to act together and try to act together in the face of social pressure. And so this kind of race to the top and targeting by activists is at least one explanation for why we might observe that. So I don't model that because I'm modeling collective action by the firms.
So that's interesting because that's different than the standard vertical differentiation model, right?
Because there's no targeting. Yeah. That's what you do. So what's different is the notion of social pressure, okay, and the selection of a target. So by the way, I'm assuming here that that this activist can't target everyone. Okay, they only target STDs. So in this model, target one of the two firms. You don't have the resources to do so. So I suspect
that's why it's better for us to collude against the activists.
Yeah. Exactly. We want to avoid this kind of pressure. We also, by the way, in fact, if we could collude with side payments, the right thing to do in this case is always to collude in a way such that if there is going to be social pressure applied, that it's applied to the morally managed firm. The reason for that is it increases product differentiation and lessens price competition when our profits go up. Right? But the self-interested firm, its profits actually go up as well, so maybe we don't even need side payments in that case. We can reach such an agreement and sell models. All right, so this is basically it. I mean, there are lots of details, as you can imagine, in this. And there are, I should say that some of these results, look at very specific cases of constant marginal cost, for example. At times I look at equal marginal costs. So there are a variety of other assumptions in here. But the notion here is to try to do two things. One is, can we sort of think about a model in which social pressure acts at the same time that moral management acts? And if there is social pressure, we have to define it, we have to explain it endogenously, which this does. And we also have to say something about whether or not citizens here are giving credit for moral management or even responses by self-interested firms to social pressure. Okay? Now, of course, what's the problem with this theory is, what's the data that one would need to be able to examine this? What one would need is to know something about citizen preferences, right? Or at least know something about how they sort. And those are going to be things that are very difficult to, I suspect, to get any kind of data on. But maybe it's out there.
You need the identity of firms. You need to be able to identify a scientific who is involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are people who do that, okay? So, I mean, there are these rating agencies out there.
You have to be distinguished between equilibrium behavior when firms respond to pressure. Because here you have an innate,
Because it's complete information.
Yeah.
You can see down the tree. Yes, exactly. So one question is, indeed, do these socially responsible rating agencies, do they make distinctions? So I don't know the answer to that. We don't know how they do it, but we do know these things are out there. DLK is, I think, one of the biggest ones. And what you hope is that they're identifying the M's and not the S's, but the reality is, of course, the reality is quite different than that. The reality is they say every oil company is bad. Okay, so they're all, I mean, just in a blanket, they're all bad. meet the whole. Okay? Which is why we had this discussion at this conference, which is why if you look at they also offer these mutual funds, these rating agencies do. So if you look at their mutual funds, their performance has just been awful in the last few years. Why has it been awful? Because they don't own any oil stocks, right? so they had, against the market, one time I checked, they were down 40%.
They were really good with tech stocks.
Right, so they were very high when oil was down and tech stocks were up, they did well, so.
Don't they own any like alternative energy firms or something?
Oh yeah, I'm sure those are all, who does, drug companies?
No, these.
Yeah, I'm sure those are in the portfolio. I'm sure those are in the portfolio. Yeah, the turbines that kill the big birds.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me mention two other things. So there are lots of things that are missing from this, and so the thing that I'm currently working on is trying to unpack the firm. So what I want to do is I want to think of shareholders, the clientele that holds shares in these firms, as offering managerial compensation contracts to managers. Where managers have a degree of protection. That is to try to see what could be accomplished by contracting, in addition to what could be accomplished by simply market forces here. And then the second one would be, is there kind of a tipping in this kind of world? That is, this is kind of this regime change notion. That is, at some point, there are enough firms doing the M or pretending to do the M that everybody has to do it. So the question is there going to be such a regime change? And if so, sort of how far do you go? Or what could you do to forestall it?
This isn't in this model. I don't know if it's in any of these other papers, but the thing that struck me as interesting when we were just talking a moment ago is that in some industries it seems like firms try to compete on differentiation, maximize differentiation to soften competition. And in some industries it seems like firms try to collude on differentiation and it must be that when something like you collude when that's an effective strategy, then you can't.
Right. So in this model, exactly. So in this model, the reason you collude may not be collude also has a price competition notion.
Yeah,
you don't need that. I know because you're teaching antitrust.
Right.
You don't need that. But yeah, colluding in the other sense, that's exactly what you see. That the industry ought to work together, and they ought to essentially harmonize at least on these kinds of practices. And if they do that, of course, in this model, they have to do something about prices as well. Because they don't want the prices to fall all the way down to the first round. Okay. But, if it's a competitive industry already, so the prices are down there already,
right,
then you do want to act collectively against social pressure. So I think there's a lot of things, a lot of industries that actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ford timber industry is one, for example. It has all of these standards, and the activists put out standards, and the timber industry puts out standards, and many other industries are exactly the same.
whereas food is not that way.
Food is-
You get differentiation, you get Starbucks, and you get this Dunkin'
Dunkin'
Donuts.
Donuts, right, exactly.
Even after such collusion in the market, the model is still applied. If we need to back up the model, look at activist pressure across institutions.
Yes, right, sure. Then I need to do, I don't know what happens to the competition part. And the competition part has plays a strong role there. So I have to think about quite kind of how to do this. This part will certainly work just as